welcome to this episode of Front Runner 2020. Okay, so now tell us, what can I expect from a field program?
Absolutely. There's effectively 5 areas that you can expect growth and progress in your field program. The first one is data for GeoTV. It's the most straight out, probably the most important thing you will derive from your field program. It's the email address, the cell phone number, the disposition of the voter. Does the voter exist at that house still? Quite frankly, does the house still exist where that house used to be? I mean, I've had databases so bad that they would, I would have volunteers walking up to houses. By the way, this is not my data. I was told to use a data set. That was not mine, just my little, but they walked up to a house that had burned down 4 years ago. Well, that's wasted effort, and it totally disrespects your volunteers' time to send them into that kind of situation. I mean, not that it's very difficult, but it's sort of discouraging. Knocking on doors is really hard work, and these people really care if they're out doing this for you. And to give them the best possible experience is really important to a campaign. Because for one thing, that volunteer will come back. I can't tell you how many campaigns I've seen send out a bunch of volunteers. They all come back frustrated that either the house wasn't there, the voter wasn't there, or they had their door slammed in their face because there was a Republican or a Democrat, depending on which side they're running on. And it doesn't have to be that way. The other aspect of a field program is the refinement of the voter universe. That goes back to what I was just saying about houses burnt down, voters have moved, voters have passed away. There's a lot of different, I mean, with the housing crisis, and everyone, and with this huge boom in people going bankrupt, we saw a lot of movement of population over the past couple of years, and that's going to be reflected in our canvassing program. And it's almost to the point where it's okay to talk to your volunteers about that, because for one thing, it lets them know that you understand there's a problem, but also it lets them know, it gives them a reason. Oh, wow, this one's for sale too, or wow, this one's foreclosed too. This must be what that campaign was talking about. Wow, didn't they know what they were talking about? So then once you've refined, you've walked a precinct, you know where the voters are, where the voters aren't. And I mean, and a voter doesn't have to be home for you to get information. If you walk up to a house and they're on your list and you look and it's for sale and the house is empty, well, that's incredible amounts of information right there. You know that that voter's not there. So you can recalibrate any information that you might have based on that voter voting in a specific time. It allows you to refine your estimations to how many votes you need to find. Well, more to the point, how many votes does your opponent need to find? Because in the general election, you're walking up to pretty much anyone that votes in the general election, minus some really, unless they are heavy on one side of the spectrum or the other. My favorite part as a consultant and walking with candidates for years is probably the candidate development. It's the one that I think the candidate remembers the most. It's the one that they say, well, I've knocked on 9,423 doors and I loved every minute of it because this is what I've learned. Candidates, when they're out there on the stump, it can be a little repetitive, and a candidate that sounds over-rehearsed is sort of boring. What a field program allows a candidate to do is collect a series of really interesting stories about a given part of their district. Anecdotally, one of my favorite ones is a candidate I ran a few years back. She was walking in a very nice part of her district, and then we moved her into a not-so-nice part of her district. And she was knocking on doors, and she noticed there were more dogs and more burglar bars, and that there were more of those little cameras, and she was writing all this down. She found this very peculiar. Well, she walked up to one voter who answered, and by rule, I do not let my candidates walk into a house of a voter simply for safety purposes. But this guy was an older gentleman, Asian. He was very, very friendly, and he wanted to show her how he solved his crime problem. He had literally chained his television to the floor studs in his home because his TV had been stolen so many times that was the only way he could solve his problem.
His TV was attached to the house.
Yeah, literally chained to the house. And she took that story, and it was incredible. You just saw the entire audience just their eyes open, and more importantly, their checkbooks open, their wallets open. They understood that this candidate's out there talking to people, making it really happen, and she really needs our help. So that is just an example of oh God, hundreds of stories I have about voters and candidates, and how candidates were able to use some of those stories to help get their message across. And then there's a volunteer development, which is really important. Let's say a precinct chair has never had the opportunity or has never been given a field program, a book with all the voters that they need to talk to in order to, understand their precinct, understand the people in their precinct. Start developing a list so that they could actually have a precinct chair, meeting in their precinct. This is where the volunteer development happens. This is where they learn the issues and they do their own research and they see, wow, I'm out there walking and this is what all my voters in my precinct are talking about, and this is really important. They'll look it up online. They'll get more invested in the issue, and lo and behold, you'll have a much better educated volunteer force. One thing you don't want as a candidate is to have people out there walking for you and knocking on doors that don't know what's going on. And as I tell every candidate, by your 50th door, I guarantee you will know what's going on. Voters, especially when you're with a candidate, love talking to the candidate. So you get all the information you possibly ever want. So as a volunteer working with a candidate, you will not have a better opportunity. The last thing that you can expect from a field program is the money-saving strategies, and we're going to talk a lot about that a little bit later. We have another question. This one basically is, have you ever spoken to a canvasser? It's yes or no. And that's exactly what I would expect, simply because anyone that's listening to here has participated in as many primaries as humanly possible. Guess what? You're on everybody's list. Guaranteed, much like my household and my mom's household. Just every primary, every Board of Education, every city council, once you start voting in everything, man, it's the easiest voter to find, and they're the most likely to talk to you. The next step really is planning questions, because this will be the area that will define how long and how involved your field program will be. You're going to have a couple of questions here. How many voters live in your district? How many voted in the last 2 elections? What is the win number? How many hours can you walk a week? As a candidate, these are 4 questions that you should know. Some of them are easy to find, especially like how many voted in the last 2 elections. And I mean apples to apples and oranges to oranges. I don't mean choose a non-presidential cycle and a presidential cycle if you're talking about federal state. I mean talking about non-presidential, non-presidential, and presidential to presidential, because they're completely different elections. For those of you looking at municipal elections or Board of Education, those types, you want to look at elections that were in your district that don't involve a major bond issue or a wet-dry issue. These are the things you want to make sure that you operate from the most normalized data possible. You don't want to look at, wow, the turnout in this year was incredible versus this year. Well, I'll guarantee you, if it was a margin of more than 20 or 30 points, a difference between the two, and these are municipal elections we're talking about, there was a bond issue, there was a tax issue, there was a wet-dry issue, guaranteed 100%. So make sure when you're looking at the 2 elections, make sure that they are equivalent. And then when you got those 2 elections that most match the election you're going to be running in, what is the win number? It's the easiest thing to find. It's the number that whoever won by. The next election, the odds are that'll be in the neighborhood of where the next win number needs to be. So you really got to pay attention to that, and you'll notice as you really start looking at, especially if you're running against an incumbent, you'll notice that the best they ever did, if you compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, the best they ever did was when they were just coming into office. Usually it's right after some redistricting that happened or what have you, or if an incumbent like nuclear exploded, with some scandal or something all over, you'll notice that the person coming in will peak. And then every election after that, they'll either be flat or they'll be heading a little bit down. And that's because, quite frankly, the idea of a candidate generally tends to be better than the reality of a candidate, especially when you're talking about redistricting, because you have a large portion of the population of voters that, quite frankly, don't really know what the what this person's about.
Hey, Sean.
Yes.
Let me jump on the redistricting thing because that's on everybody's mind this year, and I wanted to let everyone know that we have snagged a super special guest for next month, Peter Bratt. He's a geographical, I don't even know what you call it, but voter specialist with all the software and maps and data and so on. And he's from Michigan. He was hired by the city of Dallas to come down here and work this year, advising them on redistricting. And he has been so busy this year, he's told me that he wouldn't even be available until September. But we have him scheduled for September. And so he's going to talk about redistricting, and not on some high-level PhD mathematical level, but on a real campaigning level, talking about redistricting and win numbers and all the stuff like this, and to make it practical and real.
I'd like to address the last point. How many hours can you walk a week as a candidate and as a volunteer and as a volunteer coordinator? Because believe me, everybody knocks on doors. Yeah, basically to do it right, and I'm not talking about leafing where you just drop something and move on, knocking on doors, waiting a couple minutes. A good field program will tell you how old the voter is. So, obviously a 35-year-old will be able to get to the front door a lot faster than a 75-year-old. So, little tip there. But how many doors can you knock on an hour? And then how many hours a week are you willing to spend on that? On a good day, like I said, depending on how big the front yards are, you can hit about 25 doors an hour. And that's sort of taking into consideration the little old lady that you knock on the door and she likes to talk to you a while, and then all the people that aren't home. So to get an average, if I've had days where I've done 10 doors an hour and it was because everybody was home. So it's a mixed bag, but you should be able to do 25. If you hear people doing 30, 35, that means either nobody's home or there's some funny business going on. So it's a good 25 is a good number to sort of base whatever you're going to be working on.